Ken, what a pleasure to have you on my show for so many reasons that if I start talking about them, we'll be here all afternoon. And I'm sure you've had enough hyperbole and other people rubbing your rhubarb over the years. I want to start by thanking you for coming on my show.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Ken, you're very much someone that when I initially had a chance to reflect on music I've heard from you over the years, you remind me very much of someone I recently interviewed, Mark Jordan, the great Canadian songwriter. He's not a household name, but yet if you mention his name with the right circles and people that you deal with who are musicians, it's
Yeah.
almost as if you're talking about a grand poobah or
Yeah,
some
yeah,
kind of.
royalty. Canadian musical royalty.
How does that make you feel after all these years?
Well, I mean, I don't think of myself necessarily as Canadian musical royalty, and especially, in folk music and blues, you know, if you can aspire to be a duke or an earl, that's about as high as you could ever possibly get, like maybe Donnie Walsh from Downchild, got to the duke level or something. Royalty, well, as they say these days, that and $5 can get you a coffee.
Well, that's isn't that a fact, and something that keeps us humble because I would imagine, you've been described, especially in lovely social media circles, as this godfather of children's music. That was my favorite one
Uh-huh.
because that one,
Yeah.
that immediately after I watched that clip, Godfather clips came on. So it was a whole evening of Pacino and De Niro and Ken Whiteley, and then of course you've been referred to as a real folk legend, and that's near and dear to my heart because aside from being a musician who absolutely adores folk, gospel, R&B, so many genres of what
As
was
do I.
represented years ago, I've come in contact recently with musicians who are really inspired by doing what you've done for your entire life. I'm talking about, the great folks at Fiddlesticks, Steve and Nancy, and I'm thinking about Chris McCool from Sultans of String. These are all musicians who are focusing on creating music geared towards younger people, children, inspiring them. That really, I think, does make you a godfather because this is what your 35th studio album you're coming out with.
Yeah, yeah, 37th, I think. I mean, a little. I have to admit, fudging the numbers slightly, just in the sense that, I'm not quite sure. And in 1992, I released an album called "Thank You, Lord" that I put together, but I only sing two songs on it. Does that count? With had a lot of other artists on it. But in terms of being the godfather, and I'll put the quotation marks around it, of children's music, I mean, that really started because in 1975, I was in the final couple years of I only ran this little coffee house in North York, and we used to have singer-songwriters play, and Dan Hill played there, and my friends like Mo Scarlett and Jackie Washington would play there, and bluegrass bands, all friends of Fiddler's Green, and a young and struggling songwriters. There was someone that I knew, Raffi, would come and play there, play his songs, and his wife was a like a kindergarten teacher, and in 1975 he had the idea that his mother-in-law actually suggested, Raffi, you're making these songwriter albums. Why don't you make an album for children? And so he thought about that and he said, yeah, that's a great idea. And by then, I mean, I'm 24 years old at that point, but I've been playing in schools for 3 years as well as making albums. We'd made two albums with the original Sloth Band, and I'd played on other people's albums. So, and I at the coffee house, I would kind of be the house backup musician if I wasn't working somewhere else, and so playing with lots of different people. And he said, Ken, will you help me make this album? Will you co-produce this album with me? And his wife and their two other element primary teachers helped to generate a lot of the repertoire. Raffi wrote two or three songs for the first album, and then they brought Raffi brought this material to me, and he said, what should we do with all this? And I said, well, first of all, I know these two brothers outside of Hamilton who have a great little studio, Bob and Dan Lanois. Let's go there. I think that'll be a great place to record. And because I'd worked with Danny Lanois on a couple of projects by that point, and then I would say, oh, bumping up and down my little red bike. That should be a jug band song. You got to have washboard on bumping up and down. We want to convey the sound of bumping up and down, etc., etc. So, so I end up co-producing this album. It goes on to sell literally millions of copies. And I worked with Raffi for 11 years, worked, co-producing 7 albums, Baby Beluga, all these other classic albums with Raffi. And after that first album came out, other people began approaching me. The first one was a guy named Jerry Brody. He said, Ken, will you produce my record? And then Raffi's label began, signing up. They signed a guy from Winnipeg named Fred Penner. And so I've done 5 albums with Fred and so on and so forth. So anyway, I ended up, I think I've probably produced about 80 children's albums in Canada, and working with Chris McCool, who you mentioned, and he's someone else who I have a ton of respect for. So there's, so it really became, and then I began getting, as Raffi's career really took off in the States, then I began being approached by some American people to produce their children's albums. I worked with this woman, Nancy Cassidy. Her husband had a company called Klutz Press. Their first book was How to Juggle for the Complete Klutz. But I did 5 or 6 children's book and tapes with Nancy, and those sold several million copies. So it was, it was a good time. I always had a great time making these records because it was a very free, you could do whatever you want. That should be a reggae tune. Let's do that with, et cetera, et cetera. And really, so I embraced that. And then that in turn opened up producing other kinds of albums for me. So it was really, an entryway into the whole land of producing records.
That expression you used, it's something you never think you'll wake up and say in the morning. This should be a jug band song. It's yeah, exactly. And I think that when you collaborate, look, I think the respect that you've really earned over the years comes from not just the collaborative efforts, but the resulting reputation of being someone that people love to work with. And, I think about bands or acts recently that I've interviewed or spoken to whose message is focused on the children, whether it be a storytelling, metaphoric, hopeful way of inspiring children or reminding adults, pay attention to the children. Because it's a misanthropic world. So when I see crusaders like a Chris McCool or Errol Starr and Earl Johnson from Tribes with their band making songs that are very unique, oriented in their genre, but collaborative with other musicians, isn't that astounding? We're seeing a lot of that now, Ken, where you find that the Zeppelin-esque guitarist who was successful in the 70s is collaborating with the 90s hip-hop and R&B star to create something completely unique.
Well, I think that after you've sort of done your initial burst of whatever it is that you're doing, you inevitably begin to look around. What else can I do? How can I change this up? What else can I do? And I think so. Collaboration is a natural outflow of that kind of feeling that a person, an artist, has. Because you are always building on on the foundation that you have made for yourself, and that's determined by your own propensities, what you're drawn to, and different people are drawn to different things, and then you develop, and there's obviously a lot of putting in the hours to develop the craft of these things, but at the end of the day, it's also what you do with that craft. And I always say that, sincerity and being able to do something from the heart is going to trump just technical ability any day of the week. And of course, what we always aspire to is to be able to combine both that craft, that having put in those hours, that technical abilities, with that being able to really communicate, have something bigger than ourselves flow through us. And that's really when the magic happens, when we've spent the hours, but then we're really just allowing something bigger than ourselves to come through, and that's what we hope is going to be really touching other people.
Well, that's just a very profound way, truly, I think, of describing what folk and gospel represents, which is that
Absolutely.
transference of your emotions to others. And I really love the footage I've found lately, Academy playing at small, intimate venues, because I think that's where it really shows off that very soulful drive you have to try not just to entertain, but really try and leave something in the heart. It's why when I made mention to some of my musicians that I collaborate with that I would be interviewing you, the ones that were truly in the folk genre were beside themselves. You have left quite an impression to the young generation, the Braden Finleys, the Ryan Masters, the Justin McDonalds, all of those actors in their little hinterland areas or in Toronto corners have been really inspired by the fact that you've not just demonstrated the joie de vivre, but a kind of lust for life that now in your mid 70s, where a lot of people like to slow down, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing quite the opposite. More projects, more exhibition, more connection
Well,
with people.
yeah. I mean, I guess for me, the pandemic was a really interesting moment in time for several reasons, and the first reason being that uh, on like the second day of the lockdown, my wife read an announcement from the Retired Nurses Association saying, "Go out and make some noise, sing a song for the frontline workers." So I said, "I can do that." So the next day we called up two or three neighbors and said, "I'm going to go out at 7:30 and we'll sing a song and shout out for frontline workers." And we began that on the 19th of March in 2020, and we did it every night for the next 550 nights. So while a lot of musicians were, feeling hemmed in and not able to express themselves and so on, I was building community with my neighbors. At certain points in that summer of 2020, there were days when we had 100 people, all 6 feet apart. Each family unit was 6 feet apart, like spread out down the street. All these other musicians on the street turned out to, came out of the woodwork, and it was just a really beautiful community building event. And it also, for me, meant that I was playing every day, and so that was incredible for me. And then when the pandemic started and nobody knew how long it was, I had a couple of albums in the can of other artists I was producing, so I was able to work remotely, send some tracks to my engineer who would do some housekeeping stuff on them, and then I'd finish mixing them here. And then those finished, and it's like winter of 2021, and I go, okay, what do I do now? Twiddling my thumbs and going, okay, so it's just start recording. And so I've just released my fifth album that's come out since 2022. And it's called Keep Going, because that's I guess my motto for the day anyway.
Do you feel like, in some respects, it's a renaissance for live local music again? I'm certainly noticing that more small towns and villages and dells across parts of Ontario in particular, businesses are embracing more performers, more entertainers, more musicians to come in and kind of sprinkle something on the
Yeah.
day, sprinkle something on the moment to leave people with a sense of health and nourishment mentally. I know in your Hughes Room's performances, you're always trying to engage the audience. And it's almost like you're a psychotherapist some nights, don't you find?
Well, I wouldn't quite go that far, but I absolutely see music as a vehicle to bring people together. When we are in a space together, and especially when we sing together, that we are physically vibrating at harmonious frequencies. Our bodies, our spirits are moving in sync with each other, and that in and of itself creates something that is potentially magical. And when you marry that physically what's happening to that kind of intention, so you're spreading this, not just the physical act of singing together, but you're spreading this intention to recognize that we are all part of something larger together. And so that's, I mean, that to me in my performances, that's really what I'm always trying to go for. And it's, again, it you know, like I was saying, you know, what makes the magical performance is when the sort of the ego gets out of the way and you just become a vehicle to allow, you know, depending on whatever, you know, it's not about the language. There are lots of people who have applied different languages to describe this, you know, like in the gospel community, you know, you let the Spirit move you, you know, that's what it's about. And I relate to that language, but it's not restricted to that. For me, I see letting the Spirit move you something that can happen in a totally secular environment when you are really celebrating the connection that we all have, however you choose to describe that.
Is it difficult to be at the center of it, the storyteller, the one who's producing and creating this music that people come to watch and hope that it leaves them with those positive vibrations or at least a sense of being alive? Is it hard sometimes to keep that up when you see the world around you being almost hemorrhaging to some degree because of the battle for good and versus evil, and above all else, the sanctity of children?
Yeah, well, for me, it actually only increases the sense that this is so important. This is so necessary. So I'm very aware of the challenges we face and how that impacts us individually, the challenges we can experience just in our own lives, and then also seeing the challenges we face societally, you know, huge. You know, as you say, it's like, you know, it's easy to kind of get overwhelmed, and yet coming together in singing together, and it, you know, and these days I'm performing more for adults than for children. You know, there were times in my life when I was doing a lot of schools and family concerts on the weekends and so on. These days, not so much, although I still occasionally will do that. But, you know, because I think that in many ways the adults really need this kind of message more than anything. And it's not intimidating to me because, you know, I feel like we're all called to do different things. And again, this is something that you know, I'm now just about to turn 75, and I've just sort of, I accept this. This is who I am. This is what I do, and I feel that that's a blessing. And I'm not necessarily the best one to make a speech or the best one to, you know, to do political organizing or whatever. And yet, as a person who cares in the world, I feel honored that I have this role that I can play in the world, singing songs, bringing people together through that power of song.
I think George Carlin, if he were around today, would say that you're just performing for basically overgrown children, that they never stop being children, right? That a lot of these adults that you're now performing to are maybe seeking the spirit of something that you channeled a long time ago and can provide almost like ointment, like tonic. You know, to me, at least, that's what I think, especially for the people you've influenced and your admirers. That's what you do for them. You take them away. You maybe regress them back to infantilism in all the right ways.
Well, I'm not going to argue with your interpretation. I think that certainly is a component of what's going on. I think that it's we're multifaceted beings, you know, and so when we can connect at a level that transcends or goes deeper than language, it includes thoughts, it includes ideas, and stories that convey these ideas. But it's deeper and bigger than just the ideas, and so whether you want to, again, it's vocabulary. There's lots of vocabulary that we can apply to something which is essentially beyond language. So if you want to say, I'm talking to the inner child, who am I to argue with you that that's exactly what's happening? And for sure, that's a valid way to describe it. And I think with children, performing with young children, is that there is perhaps maybe potentially fewer barriers to them being just who they are. And as we age and as we socialize, there can be a lot more layers over top of who we are that can get in the way sometimes. So it is refreshing to have an opportunity to really experience something that is bigger than us, without relating to the layers, who you think you are, who you want to present to the world. You can just be yourself.
Well, and you said it best. It involves the removal of the ego. It involves
Yes.
letting yourself go to accept not just what's in the moment, but what you described so aptly, I think, Ken, explains why nostalgia is so powerful, isn't it? I mean, when music is stamped on you, when you first experience a certain artist or a certain style of music, that fondness remains forever. Even
Yeah.
as we grow and some people become contemptuous, like, oh, I was into thrash metal, but now I love jazz. I mean, sure, that's possible, but for some people, it's the reverse. I mean, I found myself listening to Ramstein the other day. I mean, they're phenomenal. Who knew that they were that great? And what you learn as you grow older is you discover different interpretations of music that leave indelible marks. And I think that's what makes so much of your work and your body of work that, so I did some deeper dives as I can on the internet with social media, and I discovered that you received a lot of accolades around 2015, 2017, because you kept experimenting with new directions, keeping the core of what you do, but elevating yourself to different heights. How do you still feel that way after all that time when a lot of people might simply be milking the nostalgia?
Well, I mean, I with my work with other artists, yes, some of them achieved a lot of commercial success. But for me personally, I've never, made $1 million in the music business or $100,000 in the music business. But so I've always been doing lots of different things, and I'm not stuck with having to, a lot of artists who have that kind of initial success that resonates with people, and then when people go see them, they want to hear the hits. And you sort of have a responsibility at that level. You've created a community of people who love what you did in whatever 1980 or whatever year it is, and they grew up with that. It touched them at a certain time in their life, and so you are kind of committed to always doing that. For me, I was touched by a lot of things in those formative years. One of those things was seeing all these incredible, what for at the time, old blues singers. Again, my quotation marks come up. And, I mean, having this seminal experience as a 13-year-old and seeing two of the great blues finger-picking guitarists, Reverend Gary Davis and Mississippi John Hurt, meet each other for the first time at Maple Leaf Stadium at the foot of Bathurst Street, where Mariposa had to move at the last minute. And that was the only reason I was allowed to go, because if it had been in Iridia where it was supposed to have happened, I wouldn't have been able to, at 13, my parents weren't going to let me go up there. But hey, I took the subway down to the baseball stadium all the time, so I could go to that, and to watch them sitting in the dugout, trading licks, and all of us young folks, just like, wow, this is so amazing, and so for me that was stamped on my 13-year-old brain. wow, these old blues singers are so cool. That's what I want to be, an old blues singer. So again, it takes a lifetime to establish that. You can't be an old blues singer unless you're older. So I guess maybe now I'm growing into my proper credentials as an old blues singer.
The universe has this way of making music work itself out in people's lives, right? Whether they embrace it later, whether they discover it early, some who abandon it midlife only to recover it later. It's why you have that contingent of people who say, we always knew that Cat Stevens would come back to us and sing his original songs. Sometimes in life, it takes time for musicians and their
Yeah,
experiences to reach that point.
yeah.
Have you reached a point, my friend, of serenity and peace of mind when it comes to your music? I mean, it's abundantly obvious that you're active in the business and that you still do gigs and enjoy festivals. But for yourself personally, has music done what it needed to do to make sure that you're happy in this life?
Well, I'll say two contrasting things about that. First of all, yes, I feel very blessed. I mean, here I am. I joined the musicians union at 14. As I say, I'm about to turn 75. So, over 60 years as a professional musician playing music. I never had to get a summer job in high school because I was doing gigs. And here I am still doing gigs. I've got lots of stuff coming up. So just the fact that I have survived as a musician, I feel very blessed, very honored, very privileged, really, because a lot of people want to do that. A lot of people wish they could be making a living as a musician, and it's only gotten harder. Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for younger people coming up now because there are so many people, and so many people are really good, and how to get noticed, and all of these kinds of, and there aren't, when I started playing, you would play, bar gigs were 6 nights a week. You played 3 sets a night, or actually when our first bar gig, we played 4 sets a night, and you really develop your chops doing that, and learning how to make it work, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of environment isn't there anymore. But there are also all kinds of other opportunities that people have, and we certainly never had YouTube. You couldn't learn. Now, like, I learned, this song Aberdeen from this bluesman Bucka White, who was this incredible guy from Mississippi, and he used to slap his guitar with both hands, and and I learned it just because I got to watch him. And then in the 70s, by then I was on blues workshop stages sitting beside him while he did it. So that's how I learned it. Now you can go on YouTube and you can see him play it, 4 or 5 different times at different places, and probably slow it down if you know how to do that or whatever, but I never had that opportunity. So there are all kinds of opportunities that I didn't have that young people have now. But I also noticed, because my son is a professional musician, and my niece and nephews, and I know that a lot of their friends and I've had the privilege of playing with a lot of younger musicians. Like, if they get a gig, like I've had, young banjo players playing with me, and if they get the gig playing with me, they're going to do their homework. They're going to show up to the gig. Oh yeah, now on that song, do you want me to do this or this? They're really tuned in, and I think that is, like, there's, just because the bar is higher for younger musicians, and so many young musicians are meeting that bar. So I say, there's so many great young musicians, and it's really wonderful for me to have opportunities to interact with them.
Well, I think in the end, in the final analysis, it's your audience that's privileged and blessed, that you're still going out there, that you're giving them the opportunity to appreciate your talents, and above all else, that you're inspiring a considerable number of young children who We'll be curious how you've manipulated the string instrument or played the fiddle or, being a multi-instrumentalist and a singer-songwriter. I feel like music has opened the door to put you exactly where you need to be.
Well, I hope so. That's. I think in some ways all of us are where we need to be, and but it's up to us to figure out where that is and where to go from there.
Wise words indeed. I appreciate the wisdom. Thank you so much for doing
Well,
this,
great to
Ken.
talk to you too. Yeah, my pleasure.